As an engineer, I loved the startup process. That was amazing. I loved building stuff. I loved creating. 8 years later, I was wearing a suit. I was running things. I'm not very strict, and really not quite happy with the way things were turning out. But more often than not, some of the really big problems in the world are full of people who are really not happy with each other. Traditional management is stuck because it still believes in ideas from the 50s of a sort of objective reality, of something which is out there, exists, it's a machine, you can move it around, you can do stuff with it. And that's how people treat, the problems of modern management. But actually, they're not like that. They're about people with views and opinions coming together to do things that aren't always quite as easy to understand. So anybody who just says, yes, you can achieve objectives by just, setting a goal, having a plan and going after it, has not ever set a real goal and gone after it. Because even something as simple as losing weight isn't actually that simple, because your body desperately wants to kind of, get around the thing you're trying to do. And then you have the last model, which is really what I call partners in crime. You join that group and you work with them and sort of enter into the situation. And this is kind of your world of action research, really, because that's what you got to do. Get involved in the situation and then understand it's going from we are going to solve something to we're going to improve what's going on. Mm-hmm. And the entire, I think, principle of SSM is then, okay, well, very well say you learn your way into things. Well, how do you do that? Well, the steps are.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cyb3rSyn Labs Podcast. Today's special guest is Karthik Suresh, an engineer and a management consultant who got introduced to me through a previous guest on the podcast, Matt Lloyd. And I'm super excited to have Karthik join us today to give us a deep dive into soft systems methodology and also a new thing that he has created, which is rich notes. Karthik, welcome to the podcast. And for those who don't know you, could you please talk about your professional journey and also talk about how systems thinking and cybernetics weaves into that?
Thanks very much, Lux. It's great to be on your podcast. And, you've had some really great interviewees, some of whom I've learned a lot from as well. So, I've been watching some of your previous episodes and really sort of taking some from them. I tend to do a lot of drawing and talking. So what I'll produce is just shift to a different stream and maybe use that as the introduction. So very, very sort of briefly, I started my career as an engineer back in 2005. I joined a startup. Two co-founders began the startup. I was the first employee into that, and we grew from 3 of us in a room to about 30 people. And in 2013, we were acquired by a large firm. And really, as an engineer, I loved the startup process. That was amazing. I loved building stuff. I loved creating things. But 8 years later, I was wearing a suit. I was running things. I'm not very strict, and really not quite happy with the way things were turning out. So when we had the acquisition go through, I had the opportunity to take some time out and do an MBA. And that was really helpful in a couple of ways. The first thing was the traditional MBA course. So it gave me the theory to understand the last 8 years experience. I suddenly had these tools and this language to understand my career to date. The other thing with the MBA was, my engineering degree, I'd done almost, I liked building things. It was a degree to get a job. It was something that I did as a way to go, get into employment. But with the MBA, I was sort of hungry to learn more. I had some experience and I wanted to understand that experience in more detail. So one of the things that I did was, I didn't take traditional notes in my lectures. I started taking sketch notes. This was a thing that had come out quite recently. Mike Rody had written a book called The Sketch Note Handbook. And I was taking these kind of visual notes in class. And one of my lecturers saw this work I was doing and he said, have you heard about rich pictures? And the work of Peter Checkland, and read his books. So he's written, a number of seminal books in the space. He and his kind of co-researchers have created SSM. Mm-hmm. So the whole area around SSM and to some extent, soft operations research was something I was introduced to while I was doing the MBA along the side. And as an engineer, there was this connection between the systems side of what you learn as an engineer and the systems thinking field, which was kind of brought out in some of these areas of research. So that's what clicked into place a little bit for me.
Mhm.
So when I finished my MBA, I went back and started working again as a planning consultant. I was really keen to try and use drawing as a way to explore thinking. I felt this was quite a powerful tool to be able to just engage with complex ideas and pull them together. But there weren't really that many opportunities to use it in practice. Although I was working at a consultancy, I didn't really have any big, wicked problems that I could sort of work on. So in 2017, I thought, well, I need something to try and stay in practice. I started a blog. I'd been trying to do some blogging before, but I had this idea that, I would set myself a target. I would write 1 million words in 10 years. And so I started trying to write every day. And I thought I could illustrate these blog posts with these diagrams. So I was just drawing little pictures. And the thing about it was they were obviously digital, as you can see, in terms of, as you can see, I'm using these drawings. And I just started writing every day. And I explored management thinking, and it just took me down lots and lots of different avenues. In 2018, something interesting happened. The clients I was working with were suddenly worried about carbon, because that was a new thing that was coming in. There was, the regulations about what you do with carbon. And the reality is that the kind of the leaders, the companies we're working with, were under pressure to do something, but they had no idea what to do. So they asked their kind of energy managers, sustainability managers what to do. And these people came to us as consultants and said, how do we deal with this new carbon thing? And I went, well, 5 years back, my MBA dissertation was on transitional change in the low carbon industry. And I used that as a way to think about it. So I thought, well, I'll bring this back. I'll use SSM. I propose using SSM as a way to engage with these individuals. And the basic idea was just, we'll get together, talk to me and tell me what you're thinking about the situation. I'll draw a rich picture of thought it was, and let's explore what's going on. We'll figure out the situation you're in and what action we can take to improve it. And this turned out to be a really powerful way of having a conversation. You go from trying to pitch an idea to somebody to just say, tell me what you're thinking, and I'll just take it down and I'll try and build these rich pictures. So we went from this thinking to action planning in quite an interesting way. It became very easy to go from, right, we have all these thoughts that we need to do this next, let's kind of work that out. And we ended up having projects kind of approved and getting done. Now, coincidentally, as I was starting to do this work, we had, COVID hit in late 2019. And I've had this technique that I was using that was digital, was able to have these complex conversations that typically people had in rooms, but I could do this online. So that just exponentially increased the number of opportunities I had to apply this approach with clients.
Interesting.
So in 2018, I just did one session. 2019, with pre-COVID, I would do 40. And then in 2020, I must have done about 150 of these. It just increased the number of opportunities I had to use it. Now, I had something here. It was working, but my sort of only question was, why is it working? And so I had the opportunity in 2020 to start a PhD. So I kind of looked around. I got in touch with a number of systems thinking people in the field. And eventually I was introduced to Giles Hindle to the University of Hull, who agreed to supervise a PhD for me, and also would work as papers together. And with Giles and also Chris Smith at Manchester, we started looking at the practice that I was doing here. Essentially, there was this, as a consultant, I was conducting practice in real world client situations. So I said, well, this is action research, that is what you're actually doing. You're going in there, you're taking action. So we might as well build some research around this. And as we looked at the work that I was doing, we realized that it wasn't exactly rich pictures, or at least wasn't rich pictures the way you checked them to define rich pictures. And some ways other people have done. So there was this kind of question about what is it, what are you doing differently? Is this just another form of, say, soda or cognitive mapping, or is it something different? So we came to the conclusion that actually after a few years, it was something different. It probably needs to be called something else. So we started calling the technique rich notes as a way to distinguish. We're still, trying to understand its boundaries and presented a few conferences to explain what's going on here. And we're working on a paper to hopefully explain it.
Mhm.
But all of that activity happened over the last few years. And then, as we get to where we are now in 2025, I've applied the method in the consultants I was working with. I've worked with partners to sort of use it. And I have two strands that I'm interested in. One is continuing kind of action research in the space down to, every time I share my screen and have a discussion, even this conversation is a form of research. I'm trying to see, will the technique help in having a more structured conversation, will help us structure the ideas? And in terms of practice, I think a really good test for your research and the theories you come up with is to use them. And that's where our consultancy practice comes in. So I'm working, with a few companies. I'm a co-founder of an energy services firm called Leader. I also do a lot of sort of consulting around just the whole handcrafted insight side of things, which is my vlog and area. And to some extent, a lot of this activity has happened because I came across, rich pictures and just this idea that you could draw and think your way, understanding situations better, and then hopefully improving them.
Wow, that's a powerful story. Maybe you can zoom out and show that entire timeline, and I can see how the different connections happen from the different points. This is an awesome introduction. I'm already a fan, Karthik. Could you maybe talk about some of the books or papers or authors that profoundly influenced you as you were working through the soft systems methodology and system thinking in general?
Sure. I think, as with most people, books have been a huge part of my life. I think I've not come across, I haven't been lucky enough, I suppose, to come across lots of teachers in the space where I've been, but the books are sort of substituted for them.
Yeah.
I'd probably say, the one book that I have, the oldest book in my library that I kind of bought back in 1999, I think it was, is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Oh, yeah.
That's really one of my favorite books. It's something which I think that there are ideas in there which form the way in which I kind of looked at the world. So, for example, in about systems, in that role placing does talk about the idea that we tend to carve the world into systems. And as kind of mechanics, you have this model in your head and you just break things up and just the models don't really exist in the real world. They exist in your head, but they're still useful to understand and engage with the real world. So there's a whole section in there about the way in which you have these models as they definition. He sort of argues that the act of working on a motorcycle, is the same as an artistic act or an act of Zen to some extent. So you have these kind of ideas around how actually motorcycle maintenance is a form of sculpture or a form of art. And I think those things are interesting because they reconcile the difference between what we think about as a very utilitarian skill versus the creative skill. Actually, the creativity is a really useful way for you to think about the topic itself. And possibly one of the lines that resonates with me most in that book is when you are doing something, when you're in a situation, that is problematic, how do you know when you've improved that situation? And it's the sort of, what you're getting for is peace of mind, as in you're happy, you're comfortable that things are better. And I think that's the thing that managers face all the time. You're always in situations where things aren't working exactly, where things are sort of problematic. And you're done when you can sort of leave the office or closing fewer and you're happy that things are okay. Right? So the whole peace of mind idea was very important.
Yeah.
I think probably stuff like that was a book that shaped the way in which I looked at things. After that, from a systems point of view, I'd say Chipman's books probably some of the best written books out there. If you read Systems Thinking, Systems Practice, or Sophist's Methodology in Action, it was again one of those, pieces of writing that helped to give a structure and a theory and explain all the experiences I've been having up to that time. So that's what I can look for in books. It's one that we're able to really help explain the experience that I've had.
Yeah.
Now, then there are a few more, authors and stuff along the way that have been interesting. I think from a point of view of drawing and getting more comfortable with one of the the obvious things to an extent is if you mix multiple skills, you sort of get more out of them. So if you can sit and think by yourself in a dark room, you can sit and just write, and use that, or you can draw. If you try to put all three together, you think and write and draw, it just helps your thinking get, for me anyway, it helped unlock some of my thinking. So there's an artist called Linda Barry who writes a lot about using your notebook as a way to unlock creativity. And it's a lot of like drawing cartoons and so on, but really it goes back to creativity. How can you be a more creative person? So I'd probably say, checking out some Linda Barry's books would again be interesting, especially if people are very into, SSM and software, here's everything else. So that's completely separate, but it's still interested in that space of creativity. It's some of her books.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. I definitely want to dive into soft systems and rich notes. But before that, I know you're also a management consultant. So I thought I'll pick your brains on just what's happening with mainstream management in general. Of course, I'm sitting here in Silicon Valley and I've been here for 15, 16 years. And I am deeply in the trenches with how tech companies operate here. And I'll be honest and say it's nothing worth writing home about. We're thinking about an organization from a mechanistic standpoint that leaders can control. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what do you think is fundamentally broken? Of course, there's many things broken in mainstream management, but what do you think is the one that's prominent from your perspective?
Let's switch back to this again and just, use the opportunity to draw and think. So I think on that question of kind of how management works, I'd probably say, the model that sort of brought home to me, that made sense was, if I think of my own kind of learning journey, I started off as an engineer. And so for an engineer, the world essentially is full of simple problems. Well, it's full of problems, which are simple solutions or they're complex solutions, right? We're full of solutions. We can go into a thing and fix it. We can build stuff. We can make stuff. We can kind of make our own approaches better. So I think a lot of us are trained in this particular sort of scientific way of thinking. We'll go in with our scientific mindsets. We'll look at a situation and we'll build a tool, we'll build an application, we'll find a solution that will kind of solve the problem. Now, what we miss with our training in that particular scientific, engineering, technological mindset is because we were good at creating solutions, we think we're good at everything. And we don't realize that there's a whole other axis over here. That's a different kind of world to the one that we're used to operating in. And that world really is full of people. So let's say you're building something for yourself and you know exactly what you want. You scratch your own itch. You can just go ahead and build a solution. That's completely fine, right? That's what software engineers do all the time. They kind of go, well, I would buy that because I need that. And you build that thing and then suddenly more people need it and you're off the races. But more often than not, some of the really big problems in the world are full of people who are really not happy with each other. You don't need to look far around the world to find examples. Just what's happening right now in the world, not the newspaper will tell you, but there are people with very different points of view, which can't be reconciled easily. So in this case, you really can't solve anything before you work on the situation with the kind of people themselves. You need to work on in that area. Let's see that, but yeah, you work on them first. And in the middle, you have, a situation where some people kind of like your ideas, some people dislike them, and some people are neutral. And really, in order to make progress in these areas, you have to understand what people are thinking, what kind of sense of their mental models. And what often happens is, you know, one person might think that what needs help, another person might think that, third person might think it's that. And all those thoughts are only about this is how they see it from their points of view, which again, people who are kind of brought up with scientific mindset don't want to believe that because they want the world is objective. There is one view. Everything is simply this particular box. You can make that box and it'll solve everything. But the reality, when you talk to people, you end up understanding that actually the real world is probably a bit more like this. It's a mix of all these viewpoints, right? And so that conversation, that understanding is really about understanding purpose. And if you understand purpose, you can build a solution that is fit for purpose. And the idea of building solutions that are fit for purpose is the definition of quality. So if you use like Duran's quality handbook, the place that the course definition is for purpose. And I think this is where the kind of traditional management is stuck because it still believes in ideas from the 50s of a sort of objective reality, of something which is out there, exists, it's a machine, you can move it around, you can do stuff with it. And that's how people treat, the problems of modern management. But actually, the kind of societies we live in, certainly in Western service-based economies, they're not like that. They're about people with views and opinions coming together to do things that aren't always quite as easy to understand. But the subjective mindset, where it hits these problems, there's conflict, it doesn't understand them, it isn't able to sort of deal with them. And I think a lot of managers are still working on mental models that were written in the 20s to the 60s, where all this, the research around here, in particular software material, was developed in the 60s and was quite mature by the 90s, really. But it's not very well known outside the European community of academics. In particular, it isn't really well known by people with the money in Silicon Valley. It's hasn't diffused quite that far. But I do think that some of this knowledge, this understanding of, how do you understand purpose and then build for that is probably one of the areas where managers need to improve their skills. And it does come naturally. In my own case, I think about my learning here. The first 10 years of my career were really on this axis. And then it took another 5 years to even recognize this was in place. And then I started practicing and improving my own sort of area of practice. But I wasn't taught it. And nobody came along the organization I worked in and said, you need to learn some of these techniques. It's still not like a secret, isn't it? It's like very useful, but it's not well known enough for managers to really use.
Yeah. I think one question that comes to mind is when you talk about the different perspectives, I see two different set of people, right? One is external to the organization in the sense they are customers, partners, external stakeholders in general. And then driving consensus and alignment internally within the different stakeholders of a large corporation. Even that could be sometimes an uphill battle. Can you talk a little bit about how do you balance those perspectives?
Again, I think the SSM way of thinking, that worldview, has really formed my own understanding of these situations. So most of these conversations start with a group of people, right? There's a bunch of individuals, there's a team, and they are always in a situation that they consider problematic. It's a fuzzy situation, also clean. So whether they're kind of external or internal, it doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. There's still a group of people. And you, as somebody, you might be a consultant, a manager, your kind of task is how do you interact with them? So the manager, the question would be, how do you interact with your teams and get them to be kind of engaged and do the best they can, enjoy their work? And for clients, you try to understand what clients' needs, so you're able to deliver the right products and services to them. And I think there's three models that I'm seeing of this engagement. So the first one is where you have, like a sage on the stage kind of thing. You have all these people who are really experts, and everybody else sits around, listens to them. All your influence that kind of fall into this category. You have a stage and a stage sort of model, and they'll say things to you and you kind of have to take the information and work with it. Now, some stages do some amazing stuff. I love everything Warren Buffett has written because it just comes from deep experience, comes from knowledge. I've got letters from 1960 all the way to show, in here. I just like the way he thinks about business.
Mhm.
Other people, you can see what they're doing is giving you recycled ideas from the 50s that haven't been thought through. So anybody who just says, yes, you can achieve your objectives by just, setting a goal, having a plan and going after it, has not ever set a real goal and gone after it. Because even something as simple as losing weight isn't actually that simple because your body desperately wants to kind of, get around the thing you're trying to do. So any real problem becomes complicated very quickly. So I think the stage is kind of one type of message. Another approach is often the kind of consultant approach, which is the guide on the side. So it's like, here's some tools. I will give you the tools and you can go and use them yourself. And so you're kind of guiding them. So they've got the stage idea here. You have this guide sort of idea.
Mm.
I think that's where a lot of literature sits because people have tried something and they've tried to codify it into methodology or a method and instead, here you go, here's our method, you go and use it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of second model, which is very, very common, I think, as an approach. And then you have the last model, which is really what I call partners in crime. You join that group and you work with them and sort of enter into the situation. And this is kind of your world of action research, really, because that's what you got to do. Get involved in the situation and then understand the detail. So when it comes to kind of entering into the situation, you have those three models. And from my experience, for the thing that I've done, the third model of partners in crime, the action research, is the one that I learn most from because it's interesting. You go into a situation, you learn, you find it sort of mirrors some of these practices about going to where the work is done, going and seeing for yourself, listen to people and see how it actually sort of works out. Now, there's one distinction that again is probably very important to appreciate. So going back to the books idea, I was in a charity shop when I came across one of John Seddon's books. He's written a series of books, and this one was kind of system thinking in the public sector, I believe, but he has from command and control. And that was like a really interesting. It was written in a way that sort of opened my eyes to something quite important. Again, in terms of thinking about the interventions, which is I'm thinking is from the 50s. So it's kind of old. And the second is that a lot of the intervention kind of thinking that we have, also the lean idea, all that stuff, comes from a manufacturing model of thinking. So everything, you read about from the Japanese lyrical, all those technologies, those techniques, those quality, it comes from the whole world of making things. So when you're making things, what you try to do is, if I'm trying to draw the same box every single time, or make the same car, you try to reduce the variation.
Yes.
And that's kind of the objective with kind of manufacturing businesses. But with service businesses, you're not trying to make the same car every single time. Quite often what you're trying to do is enter into this kind of messy situation and improve it. So what you're dealing with is variety. It's it's these differing requirements for organizations to do things, and you go in there, you try to understand the variety of the situation. And again, as I think and the previous commentator talked about, the complexity variety can only be addressed by an equally complex kind of systems approach. So this kind of thing is really important. I think that the difficulty that people face is they go into these situations with an old mindset and they focus on things like standardization and rule and method in a way. And if you have the same form, all the same processes, and we go through this way, everything will be better. But it won't if your organization is suffering from these problems of multiple perspectives that people don't fully agree and they have a variety of issues. So I think again the way you understand variety is getting engaged. It's still the same methodology. It's not it's not different to the rule of go and see what the work is being done.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, again, if you take this kind of variation variety argument one step further, is when you have people, so let's say you have a group of machines and you try to organize them. Well, you can go there, you can observe these machines, And you can see this is not very kind of well organized. And you can move them into the pattern like that. And the better, kind of reorganize those. And it's an objective kind of way of doing things. But again, people have things in their heads. So one of the things I'm reading about at the moment is that just trying to work on doing behavior through observation isn't enough. People often think that, like, we'll get what is back to the office if it is not, if we could observe people, we can control their behavior and, we can kind of understand what they're trying to do. But the entire premise isn't to have been in the same room. You want to see their behavior. But actually that's not enough because people think they have these thoughts in their heads and they construct those thoughts as language. So unless you find out what's going on here, how on earth these thoughts to address the situation they're in? So I think these are concepts again, which I'm still stumbling over. I'm still trying to learn how to kind of address and articulate them. But I do think that it's too big to keep in your head. That's why I suggest that learning these drawing techniques, learning techniques like rich notes is a way to be able to handle the complexity. So when you are in a position where you go in here, you've then got a bit of a toolbox that you carry, of things you can use to actually have those discussions.
I think that's great perspective and awesome segue into the core topic of today's podcast, which is your creation, Rich Notes. But before we talk about Rich Notes, maybe for the listeners who have never heard about what soft systems methodology, SSM, is, could you maybe talk a little bit about that? And from the perspective of, say, if I'm a Silicon Valley executive leading a team of engineers, why should I care about it? Why should I know that?
So SSM was again my entry point into this whole space, and I still feel like I am learning and stumbling over the methodology. I think there are very few kind of experts on SSM out there, because ultimately it is this methodology. It's it's not a method. It's not a follow this prescription. There is the ology at the end of it that says that's spelled wrong. Logy. Yeah. Ology bit is that's our principles, and then you have to try and create a method to implement it. So I think where you start off is that the hard approach, which is again what we're all trained to do. We're all trained to build businesses like this. We believe this is the right approach, is to say we've got the world and there are systems in that world, and we can, name those systems and we can engineer them to make them better. So again, any valuing stuff, that's what they're doing, aren't they? They're looking at a problem. So look at potentially the book selling business. Amazon looks at that and goes, actually, there's a bunch of things, and people are buying things from these places. Bookstores are inefficient. They can only hold 100,000 titles. We can have 3 million titles work every single year. And you engineer your way to kind of improve a better system. And to be fair, that has been a very, very productive way of building businesses. From the 1700s onwards, we have done the Industrial Revolution and increased advanced technology meant that we have applied hard engineering principles very effectively to change the world around us to operate more effectively. Now, that works very, very well in situations where you're moving atoms around. You're moving bits, you're kind of working with kind of factories, operations, materials and resources. Operationally, the kind of current to this build up a war, which really came out of wartime. Wartime, you have this situation where you really have to get those things to that place at the right time and in operation sort of capacity. So this way of thinking it's phenomenally successful. There's just no way of saying, it's not delivered to the modern world that we have right now. So we have to kind of accept that and appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now, what that happens is you kind of go, okay, we have a world where when you have a hierarchy and organization, people do what they're told. You can deliver things in this kind of way. But then what happens in those slightly fuzzier problems where there are people involved and they don't always clear what the end result is? So in that situation, if you ask these people, as I said before, what's in their heads, you don't get nice, clean answers. It's a bit fuzzy, a bit messy, a bit convoluted. So
Yes.
what Cyb3rSyn said was, instead of thinking about looking at the world and saying there are systems here that I can engineer, when you actually go into these problems, you end up with this complexity.
Mhm.
There's complexity that I can see, and I can organize my exploration of complexity in a systemic way. So you go from saying, rather than saying the world is full of systems, you go and say, I could think about this in kind of a systemic or systematic way. And I can use models and approaches to capture the complexity. And I can use these models to ask questions of the real world, and all like a
Mm.
Yoshi ad absurdum. If I have a model that says, I believe that this should happen,
Mm.
if I follow the logic of the model, if I get something that is at odds with the real world, then maybe I can take action to improve. Now, I'm going to say that entire thing is um, is hard to get to. Like, what's the point? Why would you do all this stuff? Is it really kind of helpful?
Mm.
No, if you read Chaplin's books and the kind of ways in which the numerous case studies where he's worked in SSM with kind of his PhD students, clearly there are many situations where they have gone in and said, we have a messy situation. Let's use SSM as a way to organize our thinking and our learning so we can better understand what's going on, so we can take action. So ultimately, this is a learning system. That's what we're
Mm.
trying to do. You're not trying to necessarily um, engineer something, but you're trying to learn enough so that you can improve what's going on. And these words kind of sound quite weak, don't they? They're not like a solution. They're not like, it's sort of there for you. So buy this from me. It's okay, that isn't working as well as it should. We can improve it.
Mm.
So again, I think if you think about Silicon Valley types, it is a mindset shift. It's going from we are going to solve something to we're going to improve what's going on.
Mhm.
And the entire, I think, principle of SSM is then, okay, well, very well say you learn your way into things. Well, how do you do that? Well, the steps are you have your messy situation, you recognize that, you have to enter that situation. You then use rich pictures as a way to capture an understanding of that situation, in a form that means you understand what the pieces are, how they work together.
Mm.
You then use that to construct these models, these logical models of how they operate,
Mm.
and then use the models to ask questions of the situation, and then that becomes your kind of learning cycle.
Mm.
Um, so probably the most useful part of this, one that is actually something which, again, a manager can understand, is it's all about this. It's having a model in your head, and that a deck you have, that kind of pitch deck you have, that's a model. It
Mm.
it might just be a list, it might just be a thing, but if you just change your way of thinking about a deck from I need to do marketing, sales, this, that, the other, to actually, if I go up this demographic with this message, then they're likely to go and use these products in a way that means that I can kind of get these results. That sort of thinking just translates to think from a list to a model to be a diagram to interactions. And they started to apply those systems thinking principles because you're thinking in systems as opposed to thinking in kind of a linear, um, you know, or sort of causal sort of way. You're thinking more a connected kind of way.
Mm.
I hope that makes sense. That it's like SSM is just this kind of this space where there's so many opinions about it. And again, I think the last word from Chetland on that actually is very interesting because he goes, methodology here, but I can't prove it works because let's say you use SSM and it helps you improve the situation.
Mhm.
How do you know that some other method wouldn't have done better than one you've used? And then actually, if you use it and it doesn't work, then, as the creator of SSM, he could say, well, it might be because you've done it wrong. So very hard to prove that this work. It's just, therefore, it's an experiential thing. You as an individual go and use it.
Yeah.
That's kind of using the action research.
Yeah.
And then if it helps you and you think that actually it makes improvement, then you can kind of use it as part of practice. And that's what it comes down to. It's what is a Silicon Valley exec's practice? Have they reflected on it? Have they thought about it? Because they do have practice. One way or the other, they're doing something.
Yes.
The ideas of system thinking and operations research and SSM are, can you take that thinking of yours and use these modeling techniques to capture the complexity and then use that to organize your learning of what you're trying to do next?
I've had previous guests on this podcast and they have different methods, but if I were to abstract them into one simple sentence, I would say they are trying to understand a multi-perspective view on the problem situation rather than, if they're a consultant and they're stepping in to help the executive, they don't necessarily take the mental model of the executive to be the actual thing that's going on the ground. And they try to talk to different stakeholders and observe people in the proverbial gemba where the work happens and try to stitch together the different perspectives so that the leader can come up with a much more different, sometimes counterintuitive interventions that can improve the problem situation for the vast majority. Of course, not everybody, but at least to a lot of different people. Would you say that my simplification resonates with what you're trying to do here as well?
I think so. I think we're all in that situation where we appreciate people have multiple perspectives.
Mhm.
And so we're trying to